Hey, welcome to another episode of Making Billions. I'm your host, Ryan Miller, and today I have one of my dear friends, Eric Hazard. Eric is the founder and CEO of Vested Ventures. He's a master of the dark arts of marketing, communications, and PR. But more importantly, he runs a corporate VC fund that specializes in early stage fintech investments. Now, what this means to our listeners around the world is regardless of whether you're a large firm or just starting out, this guy knows how to juice your reputation, communicate your offering in your market, and more importantly, finance your startup. So Eric, welcome to the show, man.
Thank you, Ryan, so much for having me on.
Yeah, thanks for being here, man. We've talked a little bit offline, and I can tell you, I'm so impressed with everything that you've done. You're the New York guy. You got your firm out there. You're investing in fintech. I mean, that's certainly future-proof, in my opinion. I think that is on the cusp of massive change. And the Internet of Value, or the Web3, all of these things that are coming, fintech is a big part of that. And man, you're right in the middle of that. So before we get in on all the cool stuff that you're doing and a lot of the tips for our founders and funders on communicating your offering, we will get into that. But before, I would like to know, where did this begin for you? Walk us through where it started and how you got into Marcom, PR, and eventually VC.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a very interesting career journey for sure. And I think if you'd asked me in the year 2000 as I was getting out of school, if this is where I'd find myself 22 years later, I'd say absolutely not. But yet, Here we are. I started my career actually in Dallas. I'm originally from Texas. I went to high school there, I went to college there, had a degree in political science. I said, what am I going to do with this? I had no idea. And so I actually found that I was able to get interviews for sales jobs. And one of those sales jobs that gave me a call back was at Morgan Stanley Dinwiddie. And they were looking for financial advisors. So here I am, 22-year-old kid. I've never taken a single class in finance, political science degree, and somehow convinced Morgan Stanley Dinwiddie that I would make a wonderful financial advisor. And they agreed. Now, what I came to learn about the program is that in the year 2000, they were generating large classes of financial advisor trainees. And the way that the program worked is they would hire you into a class, and they would give you a few months to study for the Series 7. And it was a great program. They gave you the books, they had some online education, and then they allowed you to take a class. If you pass the Series 7, congratulations, you go on to sales training and become a licensed financial advisor. If you don't pass the Series 7, we wish you all the best of luck in your future endeavors, and off you go. So 22 years old, first job out of school, I'm moving to Dallas. There's no plan B. Plan A was only, okay, I guess I have to learn about finance and pass the Series 7. As you can imagine, it worked. And I got the Series 7. And then I went to national sales training in New York at Two World Trade Center before September 11th, obviously. Spent 3 weeks there, and that changed my life forever because it showed me a couple different things. One of which is how to sell and how important sales is. And I'm forever grateful to Morgan Stanley for that training. I learned an awful lot about listening. I learned an awful lot about problem solving. And I learned an awful lot about being very, very resourceful. The other thing that it showed me was I really love New York City. And I could not imagine working anywhere else in the world than New York. So from that point forward, when I got back on the plane to go back to Dallas, like Dallas is great and all. It's a wonderful place to visit. It's forever fondly in my heart, but it wasn't New York. And I was just, everything I wanted to do after that was find a way to get to New York. And that's a very important part of the story because here I am, a financial advisor. I'm working at Morgan Stanley. It's a tough program. It's a really, really tough program. Yeah. And as we can probably imagine, I had some sales skill, but not all the sales skills. And in the end, I had to figure out something else to do. But what I now had was I had licensing. I had a Series 7, I had a Series 31, I had a Series 66. I had some experience in financial services, and we were off to the races. So I actually got a job working for Michael's Stores, the arts and crafts chain, in their corporate headquarters in Irving, Texas. And I worked for the corporate treasurer, a man by the name of David Keepus, who's still a friend and business advisor to this day. And the title of the job was stock plan administrator. And I went in and dazzled them with my knowledge of stock options and my knowledge of retirement planning and all this neat stuff. And they offered me the job. And what I came to realize very, very quickly is the role of stock plan administrator at that time was basically for me about 2 hours of work a day. I made sure that no executives executed options when they shouldn't have. I worked with the auditors on putting together the necessary reporting. And then I just kind of hung out on the internet for a little bit. I did that for a couple of days. I go into the treasurer's office and I say, this is a great job. Thank you very much. Is there anything else I can be doing? Because I'm kind of bored. He's like, is there anything else you could be doing? Boy, do I have news for you. And so he wound me up with all kinds of really cool projects. And one of the most memorable for me was, he's like, I don't like our 401k plan. I think we could have better fund options. What do you say? Like, sure, why not? I'll give it a go. So suddenly now I'm working with the CFO, the general counsel of a publicly traded company to reorganize all the fund options in the 401k plan. What am I, 23 years old? 24 maybe? I have no business doing this. But sure, why not? Let's do it. But along the way, again, I wanted to live in New York. Along the way, I subscribed to this newsletter that was issued by a publication called Plan Sponsor. The newsletter was called News Dash, and it was edited by a man by the name of Nevin Adams. And Nevin Adams put in the newsletter one day, hey, we're looking for people to join the news staff. So if you're a journalist and you're interested in working for us, send us a note. I wrote Nevin a note, and I said, you know what? I'm not a journalist, but what I am is a plan sponsor. And I bet it's easier to teach me to be a journalist than the other way around. And well, what do you know?
Yeah, fair point.
There we go. So this is interesting, right? So I'm out of school now, a degree in political science. I now work in finance. Great. Let's go do journalism for a bit. And that brings us to the marketing and communications and eventually to the VC side of this. So the big reason, though, for me why I wanted to join the news staff and sponsor is that at the time they're headquartered in Greenwich, Connecticut, which is an awful lot closer to New York City than Dallas, Texas was. Yeah. And it just so happened that I found this stuff really interesting. So that was my next career move. I moved to New York. I worked for Plan Sponsor. They were part of a larger organization called Asset International. They had 2 publications at the time, Plan Sponsor, Global Custodian Magazine. So for roughly 5 years, I wrote about, for Plan Sponsor, retirement industry, defined benefit plans, defined contribution plans. Then the other side of this was Global Custodian, where I just traveled around the world. I'm not even exaggerating. Traveled around the world and wrote these kind of market intelligence reports about economies in Brazil and Argentina and Mexico and Dubai and Thailand, you name it. It was a lot of fun. I really, really enjoyed it. So what that taught me is a lot of things. It built my network. It gave me a really good grounding in financial services. I mean, this was basically a postgraduate education. Yeah. Here I am. I'm in Sao Paulo, Brazil. I'm sitting down with the heads of the exchanges. I'm sitting down with the heads of their depository institutions. I'm asking them questions about tax treatment for international investors. You're not going to learn that in a classroom. And then suddenly you actually start to see your articles show up on the syllabuses of MBA programs. It's like, I'm starting to learn something here. Yeah. But in the end, it was a great job. But journalism famously doesn't pay very well. And I was ready for a change. And that brought me to public relations. Yeah. So I did this public relations thing for a bit, and I've been very successful at it. And then I met the co-founders of Vested, where I work right now. Yeah. And one of the co-founders, Dan Simon, said, I've got this crazy idea. I want to form a venture capital fund. Now, first thing I did was laugh at him. I said, no, you're not going to do that. And then the second thing I did is I laughed at him again. I said, okay, well, tell me a little bit more. He's like, I have this idea that we should form a corporate venture capital fund inside of our communications agency. And we should be making direct investments into startup fintech companies. And to understand that, you have to kind of understand the agency model. There's a lot of great founders out there with a lot of great ideas. And they come to a PR agency and a communications agency, and they say, I'd like to be in the media. I feel like my story needs to be told to a broad audience, which is true. But the way that agencies typically work is they say, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to charge you a monthly retainer. We're going to take capital from you, and you're going to get a service in exchange, which works great for large financial institutions or established founders or later stage fintechs and all that. But if you're a startup, it's almost malpractice to be taking capital from them at that stage to tell a story. So they said, let's flip the model. What if we invested in you and we gave you support on marketing and communications? Because we believe that the marketing communications can have a real differentiation in your valuation as you start to go into later rounds. And that was the genesis of Vested Ventures. And here we are today. Oh my gosh. So corporate VC, this is a cool thing. And so we've had startup founders, we've had traditional VC and some not so traditional. And that's a compliment. And you're certainly part of that is you're saying
I have a saying in business, if you offer the same thing, you essentially offer nothing. Like, you got to have some differentiation in your market for people to even pay attention, let alone do business with you. And you've been able to do that. As you said, hey, like, that's kind of a greasy way of doing business. I mean, in this context, in the large context, absolutely, it's no problem. That's business as usual. But in startup, why don't we flip it on its head and provide an immense amount of value to founders?
Yeah.
And I would agree that you've done that. So why, in your opinion, I just have a question. I'm sure many of our audience around the world has the same thing, is why should funders and founders care about PR and Marcom? Like, what, in other words, what value does investing in that area and ensuring that's good in your startup, what value does that have for funders and founders, in your opinion?
I think it's about how you're going to market. And when you think about going to market, the value of the marketing communications is really understanding who your audience is. And I think too often, some of the funders and founders that I talk to don't have a clear vision of who the audience is. That's number one. So part of this is just going through the exercise of understanding who your audience is. When I sit down with the founder, we just do a basic exercise. We call it Invested 360. It's really, really simple, right? Divide it into 3 columns. Anyone can do this at home.
Sure.
Where's your audience located? You mentioned, here we are on your podcast. It's global. Okay, do you have a global audience? Yes, no. Start there. If it's not global, where is it? Is it in the US? Is it North America? Is it somewhere else? And just keep narrowing it down as far as you can. So is that audience, and then once you know where they're at, are they an institution? Are they an individual? What do they look like? And if it's an institution or individual, then start to break it down even further. If it's an institution, what is their title? Is it a CFO? Is it a board of directors member? Is it something else? Or if it's an individual, what would their profile look like? Are they married? Are they single? Are they parents? Are they not? Are they retired? Really understand who your audience is. It may very well be you don't actually have just one audience. You might have multiple audiences, and that's fine. But this is where the message becomes super, super important. Really understand the value that you're providing to that audience. Very simple question to ask yourself. What problem are they having, and how am I helping them to solve it? Perfect. We do that same thing. Inside of this 360 exercise, we draw a quadrant up, and we just stick that audience member right in the center of that quadrant. And we adopt this persona mentality. And we say, okay, you are a 44-year-old, and you are one day looking to retire. That's you. All right. So what are the pain points you currently have to retirement?
Yes.
Let's fill those in. Just shout them out, right? Put them in this quadrant. What are the benefits to using our product to help solve those pain points?
Yes.
How are you currently being perceived, and how do you want to be perceived? Write all this down. Just put it into a one single sheet. Write it down, and then think to yourself, okay, what are their pain points? How am I helping to solve it? Jot down those notes. And it's just probably 3 very simple statements. And really think about the action of these words, right? It's not about, I am the leading retirement provider to 44-year-olds. It's something else, right? I help people manifest their dreams and visions by creating clear paths to a free financial future. That's what the differentiation is. That's what you're doing. So what is that current perception? It's likely the current perception is they don't know who I am, which is actually really good to understand. They don't know who you are. That's fine. Let's start there. What's the desired perception? The desired perception is probably something along the lines of, I'd like to retire in 20 years. I pick product X. Really understand that. Then that communication begins to live in your communications channels.
Yes. And
we have just a very simple thing. And this isn't ours. This kind of lives in the marketing world. But I'm very happy to share this knowledge. There's this thing that we call the PESO model.
Yeah. Paid,
earned, shared, and owned. PESO. Oh. Now, what that identifies is the 4 primary channels of communications. Paid is something like an advertisement. Earned is what we think of as public relations. Shared is something like social media. And owned is a website. That's very simple. So what I like to tell everyone I'm working with is let's identify those 4 channels for your business, for your fintech. And let's go back to that exercise we did before. Who are you trying to reach? Where do they live? What are the problems they're facing? How are you helping to address those problems? What does your solution to those problems look like? And make sure you're telling it in each 4 of those channels. The easiest ones to activate right away are owned and shared. your website, and your social media. So let's just go out and just open up every social media account that you can, tie it back to your company. Your Product X on Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, Tumblr, TikTok, all of them. And then put it on your website and just start putting that same message out over and over and over again about the solutions you're delivering. Now, what does that look like? It's blogs, it's in your website copy, you're linking that back to your website. All this does, this is $0. I mean, whatever it costs you to set up a website, so $1.50. But for the most part, $0 money right now that we're talking about are just getting your message out there. Because the way people get information is they have a problem and they go look for a solution. Here's a problem that I have. I have a garden. And into the garden come groundhogs. Now, I don't go looking for groundhog elimination necessarily. I'm like, how do you get rid of groundhogs in the garden? I put that into Google. And what comes back are solutions that are being sold to me from places like Amazon and Target and Walmart. Yeah. The exact same concept for whatever product it is you're selling to that audience. That audience has a problem. I'm 44 years old and I have no idea how I'm going to retire. Great. Wow. Let's get there. Now, things like retirement are crowded. You're going to type in, go do it right now. If you're whatever your fintech product may be, type into Google that question. How do I solve for X? And see what comes back. That market intelligence is actually really, really important because you're going to start to see some things, right? You're probably seeing people buying Google ads at the top, and you're probably seeing people buying Google ads on the side. They're buying the nouns, and that's fine. Google ads actually then that activates the paid side of this. Very, very valuable. That real estate's valuable. This is why Google is a very valuable company for Alphabet because they understand the value of that digital real estate. But there's games you can play with that because you don't actually pay for the ad until there's a click on it. So sometimes you game the ads in a way that there's actually no call to action at all, right? It's just like product X, retirement experts. No one's ever going to click on that because it doesn't mean anything, but what it does is the branding of it. So this is where you can start to activate some of the paid components of this. So far, everything we've discussed, 100% controlled by you. Yeah. The other side of this gets a little bit trickier because now you're talking directly to the media. And that's where the messaging takes a different bit of a spin on it because then you've got to think about the media isn't going to just write the profile story. And this is where Vested Ventures really, really came into being, right? So many founders would come to Vested and they'd be like, I have the greatest product ever. It's basically, this is how they all start. The greatest product ever. The world needs to know about this. I'm thinking, you call up the Wall Street Journal, ask them to do a journalism, and it'll be on the front page. Like, what, Monday? Is that how this works? They're like, boy, do I have some news for you. That's not at all how this works. But I just spend so much time explaining to them the way that the media works. And it basically starts with they don't care. They don't care because you're not solving the problem for the media, which is news. If you're the Wall Street Journal, if you're New York Times, if you're Washington Post, you have readers that rely upon you for communicating news, not for telling neat product stories. So it's about how you put yourself into that news cycle and figuring out that. That takes a little bit more work. But that's why the communications is so important because if you've got that message right and it's crisp and it's clear and it's communicating that value directly to your audience, you can be activating these channels for very little money. And it can start to drive in something that looks like a sales prospect.
Wow. So absolutely incredible. And so I hope our listeners around the world are really sinking their teeth into what Eric is telling us. Now, as you're explaining it, my thoughts go to somebody starting out. Maybe they have an MVP or prototype. They're ready to do a launch. And everything you just taught us, and I mean, these are people around the world. Everything you just taught us is say, like there's some remarkable launches and some not so remarkable. Remarkable products either way. So you can have the best product that no one heard about. And so I think what you're saying is like, hey man, so number one, you're telling them, well, build a persona of your typical user. And part of that exercise includes, well, what problems? Like if they got on the phone last night and told their best friend what their biggest problem is, imagine what that would have been for that person. It says, man, like I'm overwhelmed with my finances. I don't know what they are, or I'm busy with da da da. And not only because I think a lot of founders and maybe funders, they get caught up in trying to push the product, and you're saying, no, hold on, big guy. The thing that you need to do is get clear on the messaging, because that will ultimately, totally putting words in your mouth, but that'll result in the perception of you, which is either your reputation, whether it's you personally, or your brand, whether it's a product. Either way, you got to be very clear on when you launch that product, what is your message, what problems are you solving, and then conduct yourself in your messaging to solve those problems for people. And if you do that right, you will be right where people are looking, and your product launch, depending on your message, will launch in successful ways, meaning you will be where people are looking. Is that a fair analysis?
I think you broke it down pretty well. I mean,
yeah, thank you. Well, you explained it very well. So yeah, no, this is awesome. So Vested Ventures, I mean, these guys know what they're doing. Absolutely. So the peso, paid, earned, shared, and owned. Investing in peso is your time and your efforts in that area. I mean, you could do that on your own, or you could work with Eric and his team to help you with that. I mean, they're one of the best that are out there. Now, one of the, you and I talked about the importance of telling a story. Now, you talked about your message, right? And that's absolutely important. But what I want to, we're going to go down to level 2, and we're really going to drill down, is to say, because I've heard it, you've heard it, when people pitch, and especially in these early stage investments, a lot of it is you're betting on the jockey less than the horse, because it's a pretty small horse, right? The business, there's no revenue, there's not a lot going on, so you're really taking a bet on the founders. And so in order to convince a venture capitalist, I would say, and we'll see if you agree, in order to convince a venture capitalist in the early stage rounds, you got to tell a really good story about you, your founder, your business, the problem you're solving. So maybe, what advice can you provide to funders and founders on telling a great story? And more importantly, why does that even matter?
Yeah. I mean, part of it is rehearse it. Really think about the story. And it's a very similar model we describe about your business, which is, I saw a problem, I thought of a solution. And I actually have an investment inside of Vested Ventures in a company called UNest. And I use UNest as a great example for this. Their CEO and founder, Ksenia Udina, worked in American funds, worked in the mutual fund industry, and started working with something called 529 plans. So for those that aren't familiar, maybe you're not in the US, 529 plans are designed to help college savings. So if you're a parent, you set up a 529 plan, you can then make investments inside of that plan that grow tax-free. You then use the proceeds from the plan to help fund college education. Right. That's basically what it breaks down to. These are very complicated for absolutely no reason. So, typically what would happen is you go to Merrill Lynch or Morgan Stanley or whoever, and you open up this thing. It's lots of paperwork and all the stuff, and then it's like the plans are very limited and they're very complex to do disbursements. So Ksenia said, there's got to be an easier way, right? Like, why is this so difficult? I mean, you can go onto a web-based platform for stock trading or whatever. What if we did something very similar for 529s? Thus, the creation of UNest. And it was an incredible story. Here's an expert in the field, worked in the mutual fund industry, saw a problem, developed a better way to address that problem, launched the product, which is UNest. And we were very fortunate to come in at that seed round stage because we were betting on the story. We were betting on the founder. And we agreed. We said, you know what? You're absolutely right. We think there is going to be a better way. And today, their vision is amazing. And they've done very well, and they have plenty of users now. And they just are becoming now almost where it's starting to tip, which is, why in the world would anyone, if you're going to be 529, why would you go onto a platform over here and fill out paperwork? You can do it on your app, make it very simple. There's automatic deductions and all that. That's the vision. So tell that vision. Talk about the problem. Talk about what the vision's going to be. We're going to launch this product today, and tomorrow's world's going to be better for this reason. The other thing I like to tell, particularly founders at that earlier stages, something you've got a little bit of money. Maybe you went to your friends and family. Maybe you have an angel investor. The other thing is, be honest. And the big things for me were, it's just an immediate turnoff is two things. The one of which is, I'm going to ask you a question. That question is, who are your competitors? Too often, founders come to me and they say something along the lines of, I don't have any competitors. If I hear that, the meeting's over. Because it tells me one or two things. Either one, you haven't actually done the competitive analysis that you need to do in the marketplace, so you don't know what you're selling and who you're selling to. Or two, you're too arrogant to work with. Everyone has a competitor, and actually your competitors make you better. Come in there with actually really solid competitive research. That's going to be a huge difference. And say, look, I'm launching a 529 app. And why am I launching a 529 app? Because I went and looked at the process at these major broker dealers. They offer 529 plans. There's pain points all along the process. We're going to do it better over here. So yes, they're competitors, but we're developing a different way of doing it. The other thing too, and I think too many founders early on, is they get too caught up in what they think their future forecast and sales models are going to look like. I mean, that's
those are fun.
I want a good business plan, but it's not a have to have. And I'd rather instead, if we're going to do like fantasy numbers, let's have fun with it and do like fantasy football and just call it what it is, which is a game. Like I'm much more interested in that vision. How it is you're going to get your product to marketplace, how it is that you see the progression of your sales, your leads through that. Because that's where I'm going to make the big difference in. That's where we come together. So great. So you've got a story. Okay. Let's talk about where you're telling that story. What do the channel activations look like? How is it that we're driving qualified leads back into your sales system? How are we tracking those leads? That's where that's where you've got me. And now let's talk about that process.
Man, I love that. So working on your messaging, but also forecasting, and it I'm picking up on a couple of parallel interests that we do. So when a potential founder is pitching you or myself, and they have those financial projections, even though we're like, yeah, man, this is fantasy land, like it's all good. What I really am looking for, like I know they're going to be total BS. That's fine. It is what it is. In the early stages, you're doing your best. What I want to know is, did you think this thing all the way through? And I will know if I look at your numbers. And really, number two, on the financial projections, I want to know, like, not only did you think this through, but what are your assumptions? What are you assuming? Are you the kind of person that's like, well, as long as everything happens perfect, did you conservatively estimate? Did you come in the middle? There's things that I hope our listeners, our founders around the world are listening, is to say, like, yes, have projections. We know they're kind of baloney, but they help us to understand how deep did you go down the rabbit hole when planning your business? And number two is, it allows us to say, well, where did you get those numbers and what made you decide that? That allows us to ask you those questions. And they're neutral. We're not trying to get a gotcha moment or anything. You'll do that to yourself, but it helps us to really understand, how do you think and how have you tried to solve this problem by building a business around it? And so, yeah, those projections are good. And I think to Eric's point, one of the things that a lot of investors, especially in the late stage, you got to have this, especially in the late stage. What's your funnel strategy?
Yes.
What's your marketing? What's your customer acquisition? How do you expect, right? We got CPA and LTV and all these different things that we try to understand. I don't need to tell you that stuff, but really understand your channel strategy. That is essentially for more of our late stage listeners around the world. That's really important. But at least show in your early stage, at least show that you have some considerations of channels, or you don't, but at least come prepared for an answer to say, this is one of the areas, Eric, we're hoping that your firm can help us with. Cool. Great. I know where you're at. There's no BS. We can help you with that. You're in the right place. So understanding your channel, understanding the message that you drive through that channel, and working with a corporate VC like Vested Ventures and Eric Hazard himself, these are the areas that a lot of our funders and founders can work with. So channel strategy, customer acquisition, and messaging is so vital. You can have the best idea, but if no one hears about it, yikes.
And to that point too, and you bring up just a lot of really great points, particularly as you start moving up the funding chain, your A, your B, your C, wherever it is you're going. If you're going to do a VC route or private equity, if you're looking for acquisition, whatever it may be, that's now one of your audiences.
Yeah.
And you start thinking about how you message to those audiences. And exactly to your point, when you start getting to raising your Series A, your Series B, you start to have some sales. You can start to show what the sales models look like and your forecast models look like. That's really important. But you want to communicate it to the right audience. So make sure the VCs are starting to see those numbers in a channel that makes sense for them. So think about things like Empire Startups in New York, where you're going to be talking about this to an audience of investors. And that's where that would be the right audience for that kind of message. And let's think about how we start to tell those stories that make sense for that audience and sense for what your growth projections are. And that's part of whenever I'm working with portfolio companies, I start at the very, very beginning, which is, all right, it's not so much, here's what we think our sales strategy is going to look like in 18 months from now. what do you want this company to be 5, 10 years down the road? Let's build the story now that starts to tell that to that audience so that we can then start to look at what your exit's going to be at some point, or how it is that you're going to have a liquidity event out of this.
Yeah, I love that. So, coming full circle, I know one of the things, and we've pieced this together, and I want to just condense it into maybe the 6 steps that you've already outlined for us, is really saying like, hey man, when you want to get your message out to the market, know where your ideal customers or investors, if you're a fund and you're raising money, know where your ideal customers, investors work. I've made some notes. So know where your ideal customers, where they're at in their lives, physically where they're at. What are their financial realities? Or number 3. Number 4, you mentioned what obstacles do we have to overcome for them. Number 5, know your ideal customer and how you want them to perceive you, and then reverse engineer to today. And then ultimately you mentioned in getting your message out to the market on a product launch is, what problems do your ideal customers have? And more importantly, how will your message illustrate that you're solving it better than the guy next door, so to speak? Is that a fair summary of getting your message out during a product launch?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, I love that. And the really cool thing that I think that you did mention that I enjoy and I think I want to highlight for investors is customers don't Google products as much as they Google solutions. Would you agree?
Problems. They Google problems. They're looking for
Yeah, they're like, how do I get rid of weeds on my grass? Or what's the best mousetrap? Or what's the most efficient way to save on taxes or save for retirement? Whatever it is, they're not like looking for products as much as they're searching for solutions. And so that message
matters
is
why
a lot.
Google and Amazon have been so successful, because they're selling you an answer to a problem.
Yes.
And now their algorithms are so good, they basically know what the problem is before you even know what it is. In fact, we kind of hear these stories. I think it came out of Target, where based upon search profiles, they could predict when somebody may be pregnant. And they were starting to send coupons to houses. It's like, that's where it gets a little bit creepy. But at the end, it's like there's certain things, like there's seasonality and other things for the problems that they're starting to solve for.
Awesome. So, I'd love to, now we've gone from like marketing, communications, product launch, getting your message out there. I would love to just move closer to the bonfire of venture capital. And, this is your jam. This is my world too. This is what a lot of people making billions. Part of that is through venture capital and private equity. But doing that, when launching an opportunity, whether that's an opportunity to invest, whether it's invest in a startup or a fund, we represent funders and founders on this show. What advice could you give to guide our listeners around the world as far as launching that opportunity?
So to make sure I understand that, when you're launching the company, if you're on the
so the opportunity of, hey, do you want to invest in my company, or guys like us, you want to invest in our fund? I know one of them you mentioned was spend a lot of time on your story, was one of them.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. And then what else would you say, like in the venture capital world, when people are trying to present and get you or other people to invest, what advice would you give on that?
Yeah, I mean, building on some of what I said before, I think really understanding your marketplace is super important. And I mentioned before, where if you come into me and you say I have no competitors, the meeting's over. But the other thing too is your competitors are actually going to give you a lot of valuable intel. So whatever those competitors may be, go see what they're giving away for free. So let's say you have a better way to sell smartphones. I've got this one cracked, right? Apple and Samsung, no. That's 2008. I'm 2008, right? Here it is. Here's the future. So what I would say is go to Apple, go to Samsung, go to your competitors, and just look at the messages they're putting out there. See the channels that they're putting them out there in. And see the ways in which people respond, interact with it. This is all stuff you can do for free. These are the things that if you're out there and this is your side hustle and you're going to launch this, these are the things you should be doing on nights and weekends. Is really understanding the competitive landscape and just thinking through your own problem that you're solving for. It's like, okay, what does Apple emphasize? Ease of use, smart design. All right, then. They've got a corner on that market. They're $1 trillion company. I'm not going to be able to outspend them on ease of use and smart design. What doesn't Apple have, right? Well, they had a physical phone. What if I developed one that was virtual, that lived in your hand? They don't do that. So maybe that's the differentiation, right? Why would you carry around this bulky device when you could just flip your hand open and bam, phone? So focus on where they're not. That's why the competitors are super, super important. Once you kind of have that, the other thing I would say then is go look at, this is why you need a good, solid understanding of the competitive set. Go look at who some of those are and think about how they're funded. Let's presume, just for the sake of argument, that they're funded by VCs. Who's on the cap table? Who led their rounds? Go read the press releases. Go see how they're promoting their investments. And inside of that, there's a start, right? Just reach out to their investors and say, hey, guess what? I've got a better way of doing this. Let's have a meeting. That's a way to start that conversation. Start looking at where they're presenting at. I mentioned Empire Startups. Look at accelerators and incubators. Look at their demo days. Look at who's in the audience. Is there a way you can get yourself into that audience? If you can't, go talk directly to the audience members. That's another great place. You can be doing all this work nights and weekends. It's just building Google Sheets and just knowing who this information is. And just think about when they're going to be ready for that information. It's like that's where that story is so important. Really work on that presentation deck. Nail that story. I love that. Yeah, and really like, here I am. Here's what I see in the competitive set. Here's where I'm different. Here's why you should make an investment into me. Here's what the future looks like. Let's do a meeting.
Man, I love that. And brilliantly said, so just to summarize that, know your story, spend a lot of time perfecting your story. And then what problem and solution are you solving for people, for VC, whoever it is that you're talking to? And then also know who your competition is. If you say, I don't have a competition, it doesn't even have to be direct. It can even say, well, we're a bit of a blue ocean scenario, but the closest competitor would be A, B, and C, right? I don't have competition is not an acceptable answer. To say we're actually different and we're the first to market, but the closest ones that they don't do exactly what we do, but they are close of, right? We talk about substitutes. So any substitutes, those might be an area, but we're not too worried about it because we think we're really good and we got something that the market wants. Sure, great. Thank you. We're just trying to see, did you do your homework? And so, I'd love to just even go down to a level 3 now and talk about your fund for our listeners around the world who are in this sector and maybe looking for a partner and they're saying, hey, man, I'm good. Maybe I'm an engineer. I know engineering. I could build glorious things in software or hardware or whatever it is. And they're just like, but channel strategy and communication, man, I don't know anything about it. Boy, that would be great to work with Eric and his team. Where does your fund like to invest? Maybe walk us through just high-level bullet points. What things do you like to invest in? Sectors, stages, dollar amount, you name it.
My background's in finance. So typically the investments that I'm looking to make are broadly in what people may call fintech. This is not, there's no reason it could be more finance and more tech. It doesn't really matter. But the reason why is that we have a mission. We believe finance can be a force for good. And so I'm looking for founders and companies that are looking to increase financial access or financial literacy or some combination there, where they're really helping people to better understand how finance can work for them.
Yeah.
As far as like the stage itself, I generally come in somewhere, and who knows? There's all kinds of fun names for stages now. There's seed and there's dirt, right? Like I love this stuff. I love how inventive VCs can get for this. Basically,
you're just making stuff up. Yeah.
You're just making stuff up, right? Like, I don't know. I guess I'm the water, the irrigation stage. I don't know. It's somewhere. It's like I'm not an angel investor. It's not our model. I'm not writing $5,000 checks to a million companies. Typically, I write a check that looks like $25,000. I come in somewhere above friends and family, not yet Series A. Sometimes it's seed, sometimes it's pre-seed, sometimes it's not even around. It depends. It can be structured a lot of different ways. And we just find, I'm not going to lead around. And it kind of goes back to the way that Vested Ventures is set up on corporate VC. The way that we're funded is there's Vested, which is a holding company. What we do is marketing and communications. And across that holding company, there's a number of companies that are doing that. We have a company called Quoted, which actually is a proprietary technology that we developed that matches journalist with sources. We have a digital agency called Red Lab. We have a content agency called Scribe. We have a networking community for financial communicators called Financial Narrative. We have Vested Ventures. So the reason I say all of that is because we're not raising money. I don't have a fund out there you can invest in. I'm taking the profits from the platform, and I've been thinking about where it is that I can really maximize the platform investment for my portfolio companies. So, for example, works out really, really well. If you're a portfolio company, Invested Ventures, I'm going to introduce you to Quoted. And there's an entire client success team at Quoted. And what they do all day, every day, is they match journalists with sources. So that whole thing I described at the beginning of the peso model, that earned part, this is the cheat codes.
Yeah.
And a lot of it's driven by technology and the coding of it. Journalist comes in, they have a problem, right? I need a source that talks about groundhog elimination. If that's what your business model is, put it on your platform, put it on your profile, drive the journalist to you. Put the quotes in there, your story, the thing you've written down at night and at weekend as you're setting this thing up, put it in the profile. And sometimes they're just lifting it straight out of your profile and putting it in the story. I mean, I had a story, I was quoted in a Fox News story a few years ago about the rise of Lizzo, because I'm a huge Lizzo fan. Like, even I could be quoted on this thing, right? It's really where you want to make your own expertise. And this is the difference. I really want to help people get that story out there about how they believe finance is a force for good and what they're doing to improve financial literacy and financial access.
I love that. Finance is a force for good, my man. We're drinking the same Kool-Aid. I absolutely agree. It's got a lot of bad press, maybe rightly so. Talk about earned media. Maybe they didn't want to earn that media, but they still did. These Occupy Wall Street, all that stuff a while back. But now we're saying, like, yeah, okay, that was more a reflection of a few people in charge. But finance and the industry is quite good, and it can do a lot of good. And there's people like yourself who are driving the more virtuous side of it to say, hey, let me support some of these people that are doing good and really illustrating the value that good financial management or whatever that might be in the finance sector. Let's really promote these things and get them stood up. So thank you for doing that.
And I think it's worth a couple minutes, though, that there are bad actors in finance.
Yeah, sure.
And to what I say that, because sometimes if I'm out at a dinner party and I tell people what I do for a living, I get some of that, right? Oh, it's a bunch of cooks and it's scoundrels.
Shame,
Crooks and scoundrels. And you're right. There are bad actors in finance. To which I say that there's also strong enforcement. And that's super, super important. I operate in the United States. We have the deepest capital markets in the world. That is a treasure, right? We should preserve that at all costs. So we need to make sure that we're enforcing the rules that we have, and people need to play by the rules. If they don't play by the rules, they should be punished. To which my friends in earned media do a really good job of talking about where it is that there is problems that need to be addressed. So actually, that's why I really appreciate the work that the earned media is doing to bring this to light, so that we can punish bad actors.
Absolutely. I agree with that. And you know, that's why I know a lot of people kind of rip on regulation or regulators, but we're like, look, it takes it from the Wild West to something easy, predictable, and investors love that. So thank you for being, adding your candle to that bonfire and saying like, hey, you don't have to cut corners. In fact, if you're that guy, that's not for us. So thank you for driving that thing. So to summarize, where the vested venture side goes is you operate in Fintech, not Fintech, Fintech.
No, not Fintech.
You operate in Fintech, typically seed stage, early stuff, but usually post MVP. You mentioned you're not pre MVP. You need to typically you like to see that there's an MVP. Typically, it's just a $25,000 placement. It'll vary, but roughly, and that investment for your expectation when you cut that check is. Typically, my understanding is you will expect the founder to use that and you will support them not only with money, but marketing to launch and commercialize that MVP. Is that a fair summary?
I think it's a fair summary. There's a lot of nuance on there, as you can imagine.
Yeah, it's not that simple. It never is, but hopefully those people...
I like to help them when they need the help. Some founders are really savvy about some of the go-to-market stuff. They don't need my help there. In fact, I'm learning from them. But instead, maybe it is like I just start to think about, okay, let's think about where your audience is and how you're communicating directly to that audience. And sometimes it's non-obvious. There's a series that came out on Apple TV this year actually, all about WeWork. And for the listeners that haven't watched it, highly encourage you to do it. It's got Jared Leto playing Adam Newman. It's got Anne Hathaway playing Rebecca Newman. And there's a scene. The reason I tell you that story there's a scene in there where Adam Newman's trying to get in front of Sun at SoftBank and figures out that he's going to be at a startup conference in India, Startup India. Now, WeWork has nothing to do with India, right?
Yeah.
And it's dramatic. It's a scripted for television series, so I'm sure that there's a little bit of artistic license here. But the story that I love to tell here is, so Adam Newman goes to India, goes to the startup conference, buys his way onto the stage, invites his father there from Israel for reasons that you're like, why is his dad there? And he tells this whole story about the relationship between father and son and how that started WeWork and the idea. And the dad's like, what in the world was that? Why did you have me here? And so Moss's son walks up and introduces himself. And the dad's like, who is that? And he says, that was my audience. That's exactly it, right? It's really, and what was he trying to do? Raise money. He knew SoftBank could make an investment there. He knew he had to make himself sound like tech or disruptive. And he spoke directly to the audience. And so sometimes it's just like, who is that audience? Let's go talk directly to them. You don't need media for that. You don't need either. Sometimes just as simple as like, here's your meeting with the audience. Let's go just talk to them.
Man, I love that. I love hearing those founder stories, whether it's dramatized or not. I think the point is we love that spirit of bravery and ingenuity and, grit and all those things that whether you have it or you don't, you go through the entrepreneurship stage, odds are pretty good you'll have it by the time you're done. So as we round third base and wrap things up, is there anything else that you'd like to add and just share with our fans around the world?
Yeah, I mean, first, Ryan, thank you so much for having me on this podcast. I think you've built an incredible community. I'm really excited to be part of it officially now.
You are.
So I'm going to come out of the shadows, no longer be a lurker. Here I am as a participant. But you're doing a lot of good work. And
thank you. You're very kind.
Like, there's a lot of bad actors out there. And so I think it's important that people have a community here that they can listen to other stories and people that had a vision and brought that vision to life. So I'm glad to be part of this story. And I really think that, as I tell people, it's like, really think about what that message is.
Yeah.
Think about who that audience is. Think about a way in which you're communicating that message directly to that audience. Don't overcomplicate it. A lot of this stuff is free. Just get out there and start doing it. And see what happens. Build your own little communities and start to think about ways you can activate on it.
Wow. Well, thank you so much. And I really appreciate that, man. And yes, absolutely. So your fire is added to the bonfire here and your voice and your message and your abilities and more important, your values to drive some good through the investments that you make. You're certainly in good company. Those are the only kind of people that come on this show called Making Billions are people that want to do it, but do it in the right way. Well, that's enough for me and Eric, everybody. I hope you had a good time. So as we wrap things up, just remember to make sure that you understand your messaging, get very clear on that, get clear on your story, and also how you want people to perceive you. And more importantly, what problems are you going to solve and fold that into your message. You do these things and you will be well on your way in launching products in your pursuit of making billions.